Welcome everyone. This is almost a part 2 or a second video leading on from our previous discussion on personal discipline and team discipline as well. Just made another fresh brew of tea. So as we discussed in our last video, I was doing a lot of research into the Fieldcraft series, and all of the manuals had something in common, and that simply was at the very first chapter it talked about morality, military law, and the values and virtues of a fighting soldier. So I'm not a philosopher, this isn't a philosophy channel, but I do think that these are some questions and thoughts we should be asking ourselves as individuals in this community. I've got my notes with me, so I'm going to be referring to those, so excuse me if I look down for a second. There is a lot to this, and there was a lot to think about as well. What it came down to me personally for making these videos was I strongly believe that, and this is the only time I'll talk about my personal beliefs, but I do believe that if I'm making these videos and if we as a community are training in the use of ultimately deadly force and training with weapons. Got some wind here. If we are training in the use of deadly force and training with weapons, then I truly believe that there has to be morality behind that. And on this channel we do discuss skills of a fighting soldier or military skills as well as outdoor skills, and so it is important that there is morality behind that. And I think as a community, I can't tell you where to get your morality from, but there is an inherent difference between right and wrong, and I want all of us in this community to be good, virtuous people that use these skills for good. There are countless examples in history where militaries have either lost discipline or morality, and they always lose. We have to know that what we're fighting for is right, and what we're defending is right, and again, that's going to be for you to decide. But ask yourself, what is right and wrong? For me, I know when I've justified the use of deadly force. I've had that conversation with myself, and that's something you should decide. Oftentimes in violent encounters, be it in combat or even on the street, violence happens very quickly. Evil is real, and when violence happens, you don't have time to think about if you should intervene or not, or if you should defend yourself or defend someone else, or if those are things that you're even willing to do. These are conversations that I think we need to have with ourselves and within our community. So a good example would be, ask yourself, when do you feel you're justified in using deadly force against another human being? Of course, we have laws, we have societal values, but there could come a time where it is only you and your values. So ask yourself, when is that justified? If you see someone else getting attacked or raped or a horrible atrocity happening, when is that line for you to intervene? Because in the moment, if you haven't had that conversation, then you're either going to intervene or you're going to run. I can't tell you the right answer, but you should know, and you need to know. And having these conversations beforehand are hugely important, because when we have them, it allows us to act in the moment. What do I mean by that? So when a situation happens, if you've already decided where that line of acting and not acting is going to be, then you will act, and you would have consciously made that decision. But with that said, we also have to constantly remind ourselves of what that is. Not only because that changes as we get older and wiser and we get more life experience, but because when we're constantly briefing, if I see somebody getting raped in front of me, I will intervene, period, end of story, because it is the right thing to do. And as a man and as a protector, it is our duty to uphold that in society and stop evil. If that is something you have decided, and you constantly say that, and you constantly are rehearsing that, then when the time comes, you are going to act in the ways that you have previously thought. But if you haven't thought about it, if you haven't really thought about it, and you start hearing the screaming and the violence and the aggression, you're going to run. You're not going to do the right thing. So just like personal discipline, it starts when no one's looking. It starts with those conversations you have when no one is around. You know, these skills that we're practicing, they have to be behind good people. Evil is out there, and it's our duty as men and protectors, and as the sheepdogs, to use a term of society, that we have to defend those who can't defend themselves. There's an old saying that, everyone hates the warrior until the enemy is at the gates. So these conversations, these skills, although they are becoming more mainstream and more popular, which is good, we also have to be having the conversation of when using these things are necessary. Of course it's a hobby, of course it's interesting, of course we love doing this stuff. But ultimately, if we do have to use them, we have to know that our actions are 100% morally just and justified. Now, you can look back at Stoicism, philosophy, history, religion. Where you get your morals from are completely up to you. And if you use those as references, that is completely up to you. Every culture, every person's life is different. But as long as you're having those active conversations on a personal level with yourself, of saying when these things are justified, what am I willing to do, what am I not willing to do, then it's going to put you in a lot better position. At work, before we do something, we brief what we are going to do before it goes wrong. And we do that every single time. And the reason is because if something does go wrong, it's going to happen within milliseconds. And if we mentally brief what we're going to do a minute or 30 seconds before we do it, if something goes wrong, we're going to automatically react. And the same principle goes here. So have those conversations with yourself, guys. Morally talk yourself through different scenarios. There's a great game out there called Conflicted. It's a card game, and it's got personal and group moral dilemmas, essentially. And it just helps you kind of talk through what you do. So, again, we're not only warriors. Those of you who know Warrior Poet Society, John Lovell, we're warrior poets. So let's think about our morals and what we're doing, and how that will benefit society in a positive way, and protect those that we love and care about, and ultimately protect those that on the surface there's a lot of political tension. They may hate you, but if we're willing to defend life, then it means defending the life of those that we disagree with too. So, but if that's something you don't want to do, then again, have that conversation. But for me, all life is valuable and precious, but evil is real. And I have made that moral distinction between this is evil, therefore it is justified, and that is not. So, one thing when it comes to morals is, when situations get hard, people do atrocious things. So here I wrote down, don't be the reason that somebody else has the justification to kill you. Here we are talking about that evil is real, and we're discussing morals, but make sure that you're not the reason. that somebody else may be justified. Again, let's be moral, righteous, good men and women in this community. Let's not be the mindless, rootin' tootin' gun and outdoor community that the media likes to portray us at. Let's be good, moral members of society. And again, the word moral, that's up for you to decide, and those are your values that you have to decide. I'm not here to preach. I want to make it clear, guys, I think these are conversations that the community has to have. If you're carrying a firearm, if you're carrying weapons, if you're trained in a deadly martial art, then you should know where that line is. So that's on an individual level. What about in a group? So when you're in a group, psychology changes. I wrote down a term here. So it's called the, saying this correctly, I think, Abilene paradox. And it describes the tendency of people to go along with what they think the group wants to do, even when themselves don't want to do it. We all know a guy who talks a big game, and then when he's in a group, he does the exact opposite. Don't be that guy. And when you're in your group, just like discipline that we practice on an individual level, guys, go around the campfire and have the conversation. Get your group of guys together and say, all right, each of you come up with a scenario. This weekend we're going to talk about it. And let's have some conversations about what we're going to do as a group. What are some laws in agreement? What if someone steals? What if someone, harasses someone else? What are the rules if someone comes in but they don't believe what you believe? All these conversations you should be having as a group, because in a group dynamic it's going to change. So you all need to have an agreed set of morals and values that you fall back on. Again, that could be religion, philosophy. You could write your own. If society collapses and there is no rule of law, then your group becomes rule of law, which means you guys become the judge, jury, and executioner, essentially. And let's come up with these values now while things are good. So hopefully we never have to fall back on them. But if we do, we have a set guideline that we've agreed upon. Otherwise, one of two things is going to happen. Either the most charismatic guy is going to take control, or the most violent. But oftentimes, the biggest and most violent isn't the one that takes control, it's the most charismatic. Now that gets into leadership, and that gets into setting an example and having others look up to you, but part of that is being moral and just. So sit down with your group of mates, have the discussions, have the hard conversations, a little bit uncomfortable, but at the end of it, I guarantee we're going to grow as a group and grow as a community as well. Last note I put was, when things get hard, the moral fog of war rolls in. Things that were black and white then become shades of grey. And again, especially in a group setting, we don't have time to think about these complex philosophies. You have to decide them before. You have to establish guidelines. We often want things to be black and white, but things aren't. They're often shades of grey. It's our job to have these conversations to make it as black and white as possible. So again, when these things happen, we've already made a decision. There's no debate. It's this is right, this is wrong, these are our morals, these are our values. How do we apply this question, this situation to our values? And then that turns it from a shade of grey to more of a black and white decision. Last note, don't feel that you always have to make the right decision. We want to try to, but oftentimes in these situations, there is no right answer. but the answer that aligns most with our moral values at the end of the day, we could say, I did what I believed was right. So if you've really thought about that and spoken with your mates and in your group, then you can all say, you know what, that was hard. No one wanted to do that, but we did what we've agreed upon is right. Don't, in current conflicts, well, in every conflict we see lots of, horrors and tragedies, and in group psychology, again, going back to the Abilene paradox, which is, the group does something even though no one in the group wants to do it. It's really weird, but it happens all the time. For example, you invite someone to a party because you think that they want to come, but then the guy who gets invited is like, I don't want to go anyway, but you do it. So speak up. If you're in a group, speak up and say, guys, like, just making sure, like, no one here thinks this is bullshit, right? Like, we're actually doing this. So, and that goes back to trust, discipline, building a team. Everyone should speak up. So make sure that you don't fall into that Abilene paradox. Don't fall into convincing yourself that you're doing something. And if someone is doing something immoral, call them out. Say, stop. No, this is going down a bad road. We have to do what's right. We have to protect those who can't defend themselves. We have to, give what we can and defend others. Like, we have to do what's right. So, hopefully that was some questions. Again, I'm not a philosopher. I tried to organize my thoughts as best I could. I know that might have seemed kind of just throwing stuff out there, but hopefully some of it stuck. Have the conversations with your mates. Have the conversations, guys. Decide where those lines are for you. And then go from there. So thank you again. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for watching. Be there for your mates. Be there for each other. And see you next time.